Of the quarterly review, I ironed my blouse twice. Not because it needed it, because I needed to do something with my hands. 14 years I had been with Aldercroft Solutions. 14 years of arriving before anyone else and leaving after the cleaning crew had already run the vacuum past my office door. 14 years of watching the company grow from a 30-person firm in a rented suite on Richmond Street in Toronto into something that had its name on the side of a building. I had helped put it there, not in a small way. In the way that matters, the kind where, if you remove the person from the equation, the whole thing would have looked noticeably different. My husband was the CEO. His name was on the letterhead and on the glass door of the corner office. That had never bothered me. We had built this together, or so I believed. He brought the vision and the connections. I built the systems, the client relationships, the operational backbone that kept the whole thing from falling apart every time he chased a new idea. It was a partnership. That was what I told myself on the drive-in every morning, past the Tim Hortons on the corner where I always got a large dark roast, no sugar, and thought about the day ahead. His name was Ryan. We had met in grad school at Western, in London, Ontario. He was doing his MBA and I was finishing my master's in organizational management. We married when we were both 29. Our daughter Lily was born the following year. She was now 17 and in her last year of high school, already thinking about Queen's or McGill, already taller than me and far wiser than either of us deserved. The company had a woman named Tessa. Tessa had joined Aldercroft 3 years ago as a director of client partnerships. She was 31, laughed loudly at Ryan's jokes in a way I had stopped doing somewhere around year 8 of our marriage, and had a habit of CCing him on emails that did not require his involvement. I had noticed all of this and filed it in the part of my brain labeled things I am not going to think about right now because I have a department to run. I was the chief operations officer. I had built the operations division from a team of 4 into a department of 32. I had personally restructured the company's service delivery model 2 years ago, a project that had taken 11 months, 2 rounds of stakeholder consultations, and more late nights than I could count. The result was a 17% increase in client retention over the following fiscal year. 17%. I had the data. I had presented it at the board meeting in the spring, and the board had applauded, and Ryan had smiled at me from across the table in a way that felt, at the time, like pride. The quarterly review was also where Ryan had told me privately 3 weeks earlier that he was recommending me for the newly created position of President of Operations. It was a title that would formalize everything I had been doing informally for years, come with a seat on the executive committee, and include a compensation adjustment that was, frankly, overdue. He had told me over dinner at the kitchen table, Lily upstairs doing homework, and I had felt something I had not felt in a while. Like we were actually partners again. Like the distance I had been sensing for the past year was something I had imagined. I did not imagine it. I know that now. The quarterly review was held in the boardroom on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the lake on a clear day, the kind of room that was designed to make decisions feel significant. There were 12 people around the table, the executive team, 2 board members who had come in from Vancouver, and Tessa, who had been invited. Ryan told me, because she had a client update relevant to the agenda. I remember exactly where I was sitting. 3rd chair on the left, beside our CFO, a steady man named Douglas who had been with the company almost as long as I had and who always brought a legal pad even though everything was on laptops now. I remember the coffee that had gone cold in front of me. I remember the light coming through the windows at that particular November angle that makes everything look a little like a photograph of itself. Ryan opened the meeting. He went through the agenda items in order, efficient and warm the way he always was in rooms like this, the version of him that had charmed every client and investor who had ever walked through the door. I watched him and thought, I know every version of you. I thought I did. When he got to the agenda item labeled Leadership Structure Q4 Update, I straightened slightly. This was it. 14 years, and this was the moment it was going to be made official. He said, I want to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary work of our Client Partnerships division over the past year. The growth we've seen in the enterprise segment is directly attributable to the leadership of one person, and I'm proud to announce that effective the 1st of next month, Tessa will be stepping into the newly created role of President of Operations. The room did something rooms do when something wrong happens. It went very, very still, and then it compensated by becoming very, very normal. There were murmurs of congratulation. Douglas beside me did not move. I think he understood in that moment, before I fully did. Tessa said, "Thank you, Ryan. I'm honored." She did not look at me. I picked up my coffee cup. It was cold. I put it down. Ryan moved to the next agenda item. I sat through the rest of that meeting, 45 minutes, 3 more agenda items, a discussion about a Vancouver client that I could not have summarized to you if my life depended on it, and I did not say a single word that was not required of me. When someone asked about the Q3 operations metrics, I answered clearly and without any detectable tremor in my voice. Because I have been professionally competent for my entire adult life, and that does not simply stop because your husband has just publicly dismantled 14 years of your work and handed it to someone else. When the meeting ended, I walked to my office, closed the door, and stood at the window for approximately 4 minutes looking at the street below. Then I sat down and opened my laptop. I want to be clear about something. I did not fall apart. I have thought about this a lot since, about why I did not fall apart, and I think it is because the part of me that might have, the part that remembered the kitchen table dinner and the way he had looked when he said, "I'm recommending you," that part had gone very quiet. What remained was something cooler and more focused, something that wanted to understand exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. I started with the things I could verify. I had my own copies of everything. Every proposal, every project plan, every email thread related to the operations restructuring, every client communication that had my name on it. I had kept meticulous records not out of suspicion but out of professional habit, the same habit that had made me good at my job in the first place. Over the following 2 weeks, I went through all of it at home at the dining room table after Lily had gone to bed, building a picture of what was documented and what was not. What I found was that over the previous 8 months, a significant portion of the work I had originated, the restructured delivery framework, the enterprise client onboarding process, several key methodology documents had been quietly attributed, in internal communications and in the materials prepared for the board, to the partnerships division, to Tessa's division. Some of this had happened in documents Ryan would have reviewed and approved. I also found, in our personal email account, the shared one we had set up years ago for household logistics and had both largely forgotten about, a thread I was not supposed to see. It had been accidentally copied there through a forwarding rule neither of us had updated. It was between Ryan and Tessa. It went back 14 months. I read it once. Then I closed the laptop and went for a walk around the block in the dark, in November, in my socks, which tells you something about the state I was in. I came back inside, sat down, and read it again. Here is what I had: evidence of a relationship that had been ongoing for over a year, evidence of a deliberate reattribution of my professional work, and a very clear picture of what the President of Operations announcement had actually been about. It had not been about Tessa's qualifications. It had been about making her position in the company, and by extension in my husband's life, permanent. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was not someone I'd found through Ryan's network, which I realized I could no longer trust. I found her through a colleague, a woman I had mentored earlier in my career who was now running her own consulting firm in Ottawa. The lawyer was based in Toronto, had 20 years of family and employment law experience, and when I sat down in her office and laid out the situation, she listened without interrupting and then said, "All right, let's talk about what you want." I had thought about this on the drive over. I said, "I want to leave the company cleanly with proper recognition of my contributions, and I want to make sure the separation agreement reflects the reality of what I built there." She nodded. "And the marriage?" "That too." I did not tell Lily immediately. She was in the middle of her university application season, her room covered in brochures and deadline reminders, and I was not going to drop this into the center of that. I told her 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, over breakfast. I told her that her father and I were separating, that it was a decision I had made carefully and with a lot of thought, and that it had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with things between adults that were mine to handle, not hers to fix. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know you'll be okay, Mom. You always figure it out." I excused myself to get more coffee and stood in the kitchen for a minute with my back to her. And I will not tell you I didn't cry, because I did. but I was quiet about it. Ryan, to his credit, did not contest the separation aggressively. I think he understood when my lawyer's letter arrived that the documentation I had was significant. The separation agreement took 4 months to negotiate. There was the matrimonial home in Mississauga, the investments, the question of my equity stake in Aldercroft, the years of deferred compensation that had never been formalized because we were married and we trusted each other. And now one of those things was no longer true. My lawyer was good. The final agreement reflected 14 years of genuine contribution to a company that bore my husband's name but ran on my work. I also, in that same period, did something else. I had been contacted 2 months before the quarterly review. Before any of this, while I still believed my husband when he looked at me across the kitchen table, by a woman named Gwendolyn, who ran a mid-sized operations consultancy based in Calgary with a growing Toronto presence. She had found my name through a mutual contact, had looked at my background, and had sent a brief, direct email asking if I would be open to a conversation. I had not responded at the time because I was the COO of my husband's company, and I was about to be promoted, and there was no reason to. I responded now. Gwendolyn and I met at a coffee shop on King Street West, and she talked for approximately 10 minutes before I understood that what she was offering was not a job. It was a partnership. She wanted to bring me in as a co-principal to build out and lead the Ontario operations. She had the Calgary infrastructure and a national client base. I had the methodology, the local relationships, and, as it turned out, the time. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, which is longer than I needed. I signed the partnership agreement 6 weeks later, the same week my separation from Ryan was finalized. I remember the day clearly. I signed the separation papers in the morning and the partnership papers in the afternoon, and between the two I got a large, dark roast from the Tim Hortons on the corner, no sugar, and stood outside for a few minutes in the cold looking at nothing in particular and feeling something I could not immediately name. I think it was relief, but the particular kind of relief that comes after a long time of not knowing you needed it. The consultancy's Toronto launch took place the following spring. We held a small event. Clients, a few industry contacts, some people I had worked with over the years who had reached out when word got around that I was doing something new. Douglas came. He had quietly left Aldercroft 2 months after I did. I had not asked him to, and he never said anything about it directly, but he was there at the launch with a card that said simply, "Well done." I have not spoken to Ryan since the separation was finalized, except through our respective lawyers and occasionally through coordinating around Lily. He and Tessa are still together, as far as I know. Aldercroft Solutions is still operating, though I have heard, through people who would know, that the Q1 numbers this year were not what they had projected. The enterprise client onboarding process I designed is still being used there. I know because a client called me, a client I had personally brought to the company 7 years ago, and mentioned it, almost apologetically, and then asked if I was available to consult on a new project. I said I was. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes from having a work recognized by the wrong person for too long and then one day not. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with music. It is more like standing in a room where you have always been slightly cold and realizing at some point that you are not cold anymore and understanding that you are the one who figured out how to change the temperature. Lily got into Queens. She chose it over McGill, and I did not try to influence the decision, but I will admit I was quietly pleased. She started in September. I drove her to Kingston, helped her set up her room and residence, took her to the grocery store to stock her little fridge, and then said goodbye in the parking lot in the particular way of mothers who are trying very hard not to make it about themselves. On the drive home, alone on the 401 with 2.5 hours ahead of me and a coffee in the cuff holder, I thought about the morning of the quarterly review when I had ironed my blouse twice. I thought about how certain I had been that day and how wrong. And then I thought about everything that had happened since, all the things I had built and lost and built again, and I put on the radio and I drove home. I think about Douglas sometimes, the way he sat beside me in that boardroom and didn't move, didn't say anything, just went very still, the way a person does when they've witnessed something they know is wrong and are decent enough to register it without making a scene. He left Aldercroft 2 months after I did. He didn't tell me that. He just knew what he knew. There is a cause and effect to most things, even when it takes a while to see it clearly. Ryan made a series of choices, not one dramatic choice, but many small ones, over many months, and each one of them had a consequence he hadn't fully thought through. He chose to let my work be attributed to someone else. He chose to say nothing when documents were rewritten. He chose to sit across from me at our kitchen table and look me in the eye and describe a future he had already decided wouldn't happen. Those choices didn't disappear just because he made them quietly. They accumulated. They had weight. What I've come to understand is that integrity isn't a quality you perform for other people. It's the thing that holds you together when no one's watching. When it's just you and your laptop at the dining room table at 11 o'clock at night, going through files you kept not because you suspected anything, but because you were thorough and you took your work seriously. That thoroughness, that habit of doing things properly, even when it would have been easier not to, is what gave me options when I needed them. You can't manufacture that after the fact. Either you've been doing the work or you haven't. Gwendolyn told me later that she had almost decided not to reach out. She had found my name through a contact, looked at my background, drafted an email, and then sat on it for 2 weeks because she wasn't sure if I'd be interested. I'm glad she sent it, but I'm also aware that the only reason she found my name in the first place was because of 14 years of showing up and doing things well. The opportunity didn't come from nowhere. It came from a long, unglamorous record of being someone people could rely on. And then there was Lily, standing in the kitchen while I tried to explain in plain language that our family was changing. She said, "I know you'll be okay, Mom. You always figure it out." I don't think she meant it as a small thing. I think she meant it the way you mean something when you've watched a person navigate difficulty your whole life, and you've arrived at a conclusion about who they are. I hope she's right. I think she is. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I've learned, slowly, and sometimes at real cost, that clear thinking in a hard moment is worth more than almost anything else. Not cold thinking. Not thinking that shuts off the part of you that feels things, but the kind of thinking that says, here is what is true, here is what I can verify, here is what I want, and here is the next reasonable step. That's what got me through. Not bitterness. I don't have the energy for it, and I never did, but clarity. A willingness to look at things as they were and move accordingly. The consultancy is doing well. The kitchen table is quieter now, but it's mine.